And we can cross over now to our correspondent in Brussels, Shona Murray. Shona, good to see you. Brussels and the EU talking sanctions today on Russia and on Belarus. Walk us through them.
Well, these sanctions were the ones announced at the weekend, but we got further details of them today, in particular the 7 Russian banks that have been sanctioned under the SWIFT financial messaging system. VTB Bank, the second largest bank in Russia, has been blacklisted, but others, Gazprombank, for example, and Sberbank, have not been listed. The EU says this is because many member states use those banks to pay for gas. The other point is that the EU's position is that they want to allow some sort of functioning banking system in Russia to ensure that the average person can engage in some level of commerce. There was already also sanctions in relation to Belarus, where 22 military personnel, as well as various sectors of the Belarusian economy have been targeted, in particular timber and various other things like tobacco, dual-use goods, so goods that can be used in conflict as well. This is around the fifth, at least the fifth round of sanctions for Belarus. So these are sanctions that have been announced over the weekend, but I think from the EU's perspective, it marks a big shift, a big change when it comes to sanctions for Brussels so far.
All right, so that is the response then from the European Union, from Brussels. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, though, coming under quite some fire, in fact, in Parliament today, under pressure for the UK's response. So I want to take a listen to what the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, had to say and then ask you about it.
Last week, Putin summoned to the Kremlin the cronies who prop up his regime. They dipped their hands in the blood of Putin's war. Among them was Igor Shuvalov, Putin's former deputy prime minister. Shuvalov owns 2 flats, not 5 minutes' walk from this house. They're worth over £11 million. He is on the EU sanctions list, but he's not on the UK sanctions list.
And thanks to the powers that this House and this government has taken, we can sanction any individual, any company connected with the Putin regime.
Well, Shona, essentially this comes down to who the UK is not sanctioning.
Well, that's clearly the position of the likes of Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, and others, particularly when you see what the EU is doing and what the UK is not doing. And I'm joined on this by sanctions expert and campaigner Bill Browder. Bill, tell us what your reaction is to what's not on the list of sanctions for the UK so far.
Well, not on the list of sanctions for the UK are some of the biggest oligarchs in the country, which we all know. There's famous Russian oligarchs. We all know who they are. Some of them have been sanctioned by the United States. Some of them have been sanctioned by the EU, and they're not sanctioned by the UK. And so it's, there's a lot of tough talk. There's a lot of, rhetoric, which sounds great. But when you get into the details, there's a lot of work that Britain needs to do to live up to the tough talk.
What about Roman Abramovich? That's the name that keeps emerging.
Well, it's kind of strange that he was involved in a major lawsuit against an author who Catherine Belton, who wrote a book about Putin and all of his corruption and how the oligarchs were assisting Putin. Clearly didn't want to have that label against him. Abramovich has been trying to transfer assets to other people. Chelsea apparently is supposed to be transferred to some charity or some strange thing. It's kind of logical that you'd go after the biggest. If you're going to sanction oligarchs, you should go after the biggest oligarch. Why is he exempt? That is, I guess, my question.
Well, that is the question I was going to ask you. I mean, is there a feeling that these Russian oligarchs, this is certainly what many MPs in the UK, journalists are saying, is that a lot of this money rolls into the Tory party?
Well, I as far as I'm aware, Abramovich hasn't given any money to the Tory party. Some totally unknown Russians have. I don't think that that's the reason why he's not on the sanctions list. I would imagine, just from reading the tea leaves and looking at a few articles, that the Foreign Office is petrified of the army of lawyers that will come after them the moment that he or others are put on the sanctions list, and so they're tiptoeing around. But we're in a moment of national security. I don't think being afraid of lawyers is a good excuse when bullets are flying and missiles are being launched and so on.
So what do you think of the EU's shift in policy? Because this time last week we weren't even talking about SWIFT. Now you've seen suspension of the licenses for Sputnik, for RT. Really, the EU has moved almost past the Rubicon at this stage when it came to sanctions.
Well, so the EU is, it's a total 180-degree turn. The EU is the first national bloc to talk about sanctioning Putin himself and Sergei Lavrov. The EU has stopped Russian jets and private jets from entering the airspace, involved in SWIFT and freezing the central bank's assets. But on the SWIFT, as we kind of discover the details, we discover that that there's a lot of ways in which the banking system still works. And if we want to, if the objective is to really pound Russia hard economically, then we should have pounded them hard. And the fact that there's all these loopholes on the SWIFT just shows you, the way that Europe works, which is, great announcements, but then really kind of ugly, smoky backroom deals that we don't even know how they came about.
So how do you feel these sanctions are going to work in terms of, I suppose, popular opinion in Russia and the impact on what Putin's going to do?
Well, Putin, we could have altered Putin's calculus before he launched the invasion. So Putin is a guy who, when he gets involved in a conflict, he can never back down. He doesn't have a reverse gear. He's absolutely unwilling to show that he made a mistake, admit a mistake. He has to always be the tough guy. And so now that he's escalated, all he can do is continue to escalate. And so at this point, the sanctions are not about negotiating with him, and anyone who's putting them in place with that thought is going to be disappointed. The sanctions at this point are to deplete him of the resources to execute a war. If we freeze his central bank assets, if we were to do a proper SWIFT unplugging of the whole banking system, and if we were to do a proper freezing of the oligarchs' assets, then there wouldn't be any money left for him to execute his war after some period of time. And so that, in my mind, is what's going to stop him. It's not going to be he's not going to stop on his own volition. He's going to stop because gravity will, get in the way. And the gravity is lack of money.
Okay, Bill Browder, author of Red Notice, Magnitsky Act campaigner. Thank you very much for joining us.